welcome to Lovin' Life's Journey DIY. If you are new to my channel, my name is Chantel and I love to do Dollar Tree DIYs and DIYs on a budget. And I'm really excited for today's video because I am going to be taking these fun shelves from Dollar Tree and I'm going to show you how to elevate them to a whole new level. So let's jump in and get started.
We are going to start off with this gorgeous hanging three-tiered shelf. For this project, I will be using 3 of these wall shelves from Dollar Tree. These are approximately 13 by 5 inches. I will also be using 16 feet of this macrame cord that I picked up at Dollar Tree. You could also use something like this braided cotton cord from Ace Hardware. I will be using several small pieces of jute twine as well as some brown craft paint, and you will need some hooks to hang your shelves with. I have these that I'm planning to use. These are just some coat hooks that I picked up at Walmart. I'm going to start by sanding off any rough edges or splinters on all of my shelves. Then I'm going to take a little bit of water and I'm going to add just a little bit of my brown craft paint to that water. Basically, I'm making my own stain. I prefer to do this instead of using an actual stain. I just think it's easier to work with and it's a lot easier to clean up. So I'm going for a pretty light colored stain here. So I'm just doing a few tests to see if I like the color, and I did add a little bit more paint to my water, and once I got kind of the look that I want, I'm going to go ahead and paint all of my shelves. One thing I really like about this technique is I think it's very easy to control how dark you get your stain on your wood because you can go over it several times to darken it, and it's just really easy to control. And because I'm impatient and because it is pretty wet since my paint is very watered down, I am using my heat tool to dry this in between coats. And I love using my heat tool for crafting, for drying paint and stain and things like that. So I will leave that linked if you are interested. All of my favorite crafting tools are linked in the description box below. So here's what my shelves look like after one coat of my stain. So I did want them a little bit darker, so I'm going over them with a second coat. So I figured out all of the measurements and drew out a diagram and just kind of scratched it out on a pad. I am going to leave a link in the description box to a much neater diagram with all of the measurements for you so that you can download that or print it and have that to reference. Because this project is a little bit more complicated and I did have to refer to my diagram several times, so I'm sure that you'll want to have that as well. So I will be using 16 feet of this cotton twine, and I am going to cut one piece that is 72 inches long, another piece that is 48 inches long, one piece that is 28 inches long, and 2 pieces that are 24 inches long. And those will be listed on that diagram that you can download. I'm going to start with my 72-inch long piece, and I am going to put the two ends together and fold it in half to find the center. Then I am going to measure 1 inch from the folded center point and put a little bit of hot glue just to form a loop. Now I'm going to take a small piece of jute twine and just down 1 inch from that folded top, I'm going to wrap it around about 5 times and secure it with some hot glue. And I'm doing this just to give it kind of a finished and high-end or elevated look. And so if you prefer not to use the jute twine, that's completely up to you. And I did repeat this process for both the 48-inch piece and the 28-inch piece. So basically the three longer pieces will all be folded in half and the jute twine wrapped around the top. So now we're going to assemble this, which can be a little bit confusing, so I will do my best to explain this, and the diagram will help with this as well. I'm going to start with my top shelf, and on the left side I am going to use the longest piece of twine, so the one that was 72 inches that we folded in half. I'm going to be using that. And I did put a little bit of hot glue on the ends of the piece of twine and kind of twisted them just to help me get them through the holes of the shelves a little bit easier. So I'm just putting the twine through the holes at this point. I'm not tying any knots or securing it in any way. So I will have that longest piece on the left hand side. And then on the right hand side, I'm going to be putting the 28-inch piece. So folded in half, it would be 14 inches. So that is the one that I'm going to be threading through those right hand side holes. And I'm just using a stylus to kind of make sure my holes are cleaned out of any splinters or anything, so that it's easier to get the twine through. And then again, I'm putting the hot glue on the ends of the twine to help thread it through as well. So to figure out where to tie the knots for my cord, I'm going to hold the cord up so that the back piece is straight up and down, and it should be 12 inches from the top of the shelf to the top of the cord. And I'm going to tie a knot on the bottom of the shelf to hold the cord in place. Now, I used a Sharpie marker on the bottom side of my shelf to mark the twine where I had figured out what length I thought it should be, and that way when I tied my knot I could see where that mark was on the cord, and that should line up at the bottom of the shelf. And I know this is a little bit confusing, but it will kind of make sense as you're doing it. And so the main thing here is to remember that the cord that is on the back of your shelf, which will be up against the wall, needs to be straight up and down. And so the cord that is going to the front hole of your shelf is actually going to be a little bit longer. So you can see it's more of at an angle, whereas the back cord is more straight up and down. And like I said, it will kind of make sense as you put it together, but you have to do it this way so that your shelf will be level. Then I'm going to repeat the same thing on the left-hand side of my shelf. Now the cords are longer on this, so I want the cords that are on top of the shelf obviously to be the same length on both sides so that it hangs level. So I'm going to just repeat what I just did on the right hand side and tie my knots, but the only difference is I will have some long cords hanging down at the bottom of my shelf on the left hand side. One thing that I found very helpful was to actually put this up on the wall, and so I put some pins in the wall 12 inches apart, and I hung this up to make sure that it was going to hang straight or level, and this just kind of gave me confidence that I was on the right track. So this is what it should look like at this step, with the shelf with the long cords hanging down on the left hand side. So I took my shelf down, and now on the bottom side of this shelf, I am going to find the center point. So I'm just going to measure lengthwise and mark the center, and then I'm going to measure widthwise and mark the center, so I find the exact center point of this shelf. Then I'm going to take one of the 24-inch long pieces of cord, and I'm going to go ahead and put a little hot glue on the ends of that. Then I'm going to fold it in half and glue the center point to that center mark that I put on the bottom of this shelf. I'm just using some Gorilla hot glue, but I will also be using my staple gun to staple this so that it has a stronger hold. I am putting a cutting board underneath this just to make sure, in case a staple goes through, that it protects my work surface. I did measure this. I'm using 1/4-inch staples, and it should be fine for this. I did also a test on another just shelf that I had, and so the 1/4-inch staples seem to work fine for this. So now I'm going to move on to my next shelf. This will be the middle shelf, and on the right hand side of this shelf I will be using the 48-inch cord that we cut and divided in half and wrapped the twine around the top. So this cord, again, I'll put some hot glue on the ends, thread it through those right hand side holes, and then I'm going to be tying some knots on this. The measurement will be 22 inches from the top of the shelf to the top of the cord for the cord that's in the back hole of the shelf. And again, that back cord is going to be more straight up and down, while the front cord is going to be at an angle and a little bit longer. So here's where it gets a little bit tricky. The left side of that middle shelf is going to be attached to that cord that we stapled to the bottom of the top shelf. So now I'm going to thread the ends of those into the holes on the left side of that middle shelf. The space between these two shelves should be 10 inches, and the tough part with this is keeping them upright while you're trying to measure, but it should be 10 inches in between the shelves. So when you get that situated, then you can tie the knots on the bottom of that middle shelf on those cords on the left side. And again, I hung my shelf up to make sure that it was looking good and everything was still straight and level. And when you hang this, the hook at the top on the far right is 6 inches from the center hook. And since everything is looking good, now I'm going to measure and find the center point of the bottom of the middle shelf. Just like we did with the top shelf, I'm going to measure and mark that middle spot on that middle shelf, and then I am going to go ahead and attach the other 24-inch cord to the bottom of this middle shelf, just like I did on the top shelf. This cord is going to be what I use to attach my bottom shelf with on the right hand side. So I'm going to grab that third shelf and I'm going to thread the cord through the right hand side holes of this shelf. And then those long cords that were hanging down on the left-hand side of our very top shelf are going to be threaded through the left-hand holes on this bottom shelf. And so once I get those through the holes, now I'm using some spray paint cans to kind of hold up all my shelves to get them all lined up, just so I can try and measure and make sure that everything is even and level before I tie off my knots. And as you can see, this was a little bit precarious, but I got it figured out. And so the measurement in between the top shelf and the bottom shelf should be 20 inches. So that's what I'm measuring here, just to make sure that I have that correct. And then I'll go ahead and tie my knots. And when I hung this up to check it and make sure it was right, the bottom shelf did not want to hang right. It was kind of hanging out away from the wall on the right hand side a little bit. And so I just noticed that I needed to make that front right cord a little bit shorter. So I just adjusted the knot on that, and then it hung just fine. And here I have mine hanging just temporarily with some T-pins. You definitely would want to use something like those coat hooks to hang it more permanently so that it would be stronger as well. For this next project, I will be using all Dollar Tree supplies. I will be using one of the wall shelves, some round wood beads, as well as some square wood beads, and also some cotton twine that I picked up a while back at Dollar Tree as well. This shelf was pretty smooth, but it did have a few splinters around the holes, so I just went over it real quick with some sandpaper. And I'm going to be using 8 of the round wood beads and 12 of the square wood beads. For this project, I am going to be leaving the shelf as well as the round beads, just the natural finish. I'm not going to paint them or anything, but the square wood beads I am going to paint. So I'm going to put those in a little Ziploc baggie, and I'm going to add a little bit of black chalk paint as well as a little bit of water. I think this is the easiest and cleanest way to paint wood beads. And so I'm just putting a little bit of paint in the bag, and then I'll add a little bit of water, zip that bag closed, and then just kind of squish them all around until all of the beads are covered with the paint. Then I'll just empty those out onto a paper towel, and I usually use a paintbrush to kind of go over them anywhere where there's any blobs of paint or a lack of paint. I just kind of spread it around and even it out a little bit, and then I let them dry. This is just so quick and easy, and it keeps your fingers clean, and so I think this is just a great hack for painting wood beads. While my beads are drying, I'm going to be making 4 of these tassels using the cotton twine. And to do this, I'm going to cut a couple pieces of twine that are about 5 or 6 inches long. And then I am going to wrap the twine around my fingers 15 times. You'll see how I'm doing that here. And then I will put one of those shorter pieces that I cut through the top of the loop of those that I just wrapped around my fingers and tie them off, just tie a knot to hold them together. Then I'm going to take the other short piece of twine and tie it down from the top of my little tassel about 3/4 of an inch or so maybe. Just making sure that all 4 of the tassels that I make are the same size and match, and then I'm going to tie that off. Then I'll just use my scissors to cut through all those loops on the bottom and then trim it all up at the bottom so that it's fairly even and the same length as my other tassels. And I'll just repeat this until I have 4 tassels. I'm going to use the cord that came with the shelf, and it comes just in one piece, so I am putting the ends together and finding the center of this cord, and then I will cut it into 2 pieces. Then I'm going to attach them to the ring that came with the shelf by putting the looped end through the ring and pulling the ends through that loop, and I will attach both pieces to the ring this way. I'm going to use my hot glue gun and put a little dab of glue on the end of all 4 of those strands and just twist them a little bit so that it will be easier to thread my beads onto the cords. Then I'm going to go ahead and thread my beads onto the cords. I'm doing 1 of the black square beads, 2 of the natural round beads, and then 2 more square beads. And I'm going to do this on all 4 of the cords. Then I just threaded the ends of the cords through the holes on my shelf and tied knots on the bottom of the shelf, and just made sure that, again, my shelf was going to hang level. So I did the back cords just a little bit shorter than the front ones, and that seemed to work well. Now I'm going to attach my tassels to my shelf, and so I'm going to trim off any excess of the cord that's hanging below the knots that I tied. And then I'm going to just hot glue my tassel tops to those knots so that they hang down below the shelf. For this project, I will be using a cooling rack from the baking section at Dollar Tree, 1 of the wall shelves. This again is the approximately 13 by 5 size. And I will be using 1 12-inch wood dowel. You can purchase these in a package of, I believe it's 12 at Dollar Tree. I'll be using some wood filler as well as some stain or brown paint. I think I'm just going to use the brown paint, but you could use stain. And I'll be using some black spray paint. These wire cooling racks come with bent wires on them that act as feet to hold the rack up off the table or counter. And I want to keep 2 of them on one end of the rack, but the ones on the other end, I am going to actually cut out using some wire cutters, and these cut out pretty easily. Next, I'm going to use my shelf to help me bend up the end that I just cut those wires out of. And you do want to make sure that the other bent wires are facing up. When you do this, you want those facing up, and you're going to bend this bottom section up as well. And so I'm just using the shelf as a guide to help me bend the wire. It is a little hard to get started, but once you get it started, it bends fairly easily. And so here you see I have it at a 90-degree angle. This is going to be used as a support for my shelf. Now I'm going to go give my cooling rack a couple of coats of that black spray paint. And while that's drying, I am going to use my wood filler to fill the holes on the shelf. I'm filling the holes on both sides, and then once that filler has dried, I will sand it off so it's nice and smooth, and I'll do this on both sides. And then it's ready for a coat of stain or paint. I was thinking a stain would be pretty, but honestly, I like using the paint, mixing it with water, and kind of making my own stain, just because I think it's easier to work with and it's much cleaner. It also doesn't smell as bad. I did do 2 coats of the black spray paint on my cooling rack, and then I did a couple coats of a clear sealer on it as well to help keep that paint on the rack. So now I'm going to attach my shelf to the cooling rack. So I'm going to turn this over and hang the long edge over the edge of my desk. But first I'm going to put down a cutting board because I will be using my staple gun to attach the cooling rack to the shelf. I'm going to measure and make sure I have that rack centered on the shelf, just making sure that I have the same amount of the shelf hanging over on each side. And I always like to wear my safety glasses when I'm using the staple gun. That's always a good idea. And then I'm going to use my staple gun to attach this wire rack to the shelf. Now I'm going to take my 12-inch dowel and I am going to slide it in where those other bent wires are at the top of the cooling rack, and this is going to make a little hanging rod. Just a disclaimer here, this shelf is not really strong, so you don't want to put anything too heavy on the shelf, but you could hang some mugs from the dowel using some S-hooks and set some little coffee pods or something on the shelf. You could also use this in a bathroom or bedroom to hang jewelry on. I think it works pretty well for that. Let me know in the comments what you would use this little shelf for. Also, let me know down in the comments which one of these projects is your favorite, or if you're going to give any of them a try. If you enjoyed this video and these projects, please hit that like button. It really helps my channel and helps other people to see this video as well. If you like Dollar Tree DIYs and DIYs on a budget and you haven't subscribed yet, be sure to hit that subscribe button as well as the bell to set your notifications so that YouTube will notify you every time I upload a new video. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you all have a blessed day.